quiet English countryside where the winds carried the whispers of old estates and broken promises. Little girl, named Diana Spencer, grew up in the shadows. Sandringham was her childhood home, a place of wide lawns, ancient trees, and rooms that seemed too big for a child's laughter. She was born into aristocracy, but not into happiness. Her parents' marriage was crumbling. Diana was only 6 when the silence of her house became heavier than the grand portraits on the walls. Her mother, Frances, left suddenly one winter afternoon. Diana remembered clutching the banister, watching her mother's car disappear into the mist. She would later say, "That moment cut through her like a knife." Nights were the hardest. She would press her face into her pillow, praying that if she loved harder, people would stop leaving. To her nanny, she once whispered, "Maybe, if I care for everyone, no one will abandon me." It was a child's thought, but it became the seed of a destiny. School never felt like home. She was shy, often hiding behind her long blonde hair, terrified of being noticed, yet itching to be seen. Teachers wrote she was quiet, gentle, sensitive. But inside her, a storm of longing brewed. She wasn't the brightest student in academics, but she carried something different, an unusual empathy, a deep ability to feel others' pain. One afternoon, while walking past the schoolyard, she saw a little boy crying because the others refused to play with him. Diana sat beside him, wiped his tears, and stayed until he smiled. It was the first spark of what would later make her the of hearts. But as the years passed, loneliness grew heavier. Diana's father tried his best, but he was strict, bound by tradition. Her siblings were often away. She wandered through the empty halls of her home, dreaming of a future where she could give love as freely as she wished. What she did not know was that fate was already preparing her. A broken child, searching for love, was being shaped into the woman who would one day give love to millions. And in the distance, destiny whispered, the girl who felt abandoned would soon stand before the world as a princess. But every crown comes with shadows. The world called it a fairy tale. The shy girl from Sandringham had captured the heart of a prince, and soon she would become a princess. Newspapers screamed of romance. Television channels broadcast every smile, every gesture, every step she took beside Prince Charles. To millions, it was the beginning of happily ever after. But to Diana, it was the beginning of something else, something darker. When Charles proposed, Diana felt a strange mix of disbelief and dread. She was only 19, barely a woman, still unsure of herself, still carrying the wounds of a broken childhood. Yet suddenly, the eyes of the world were on her. She remembered sitting alone in her room after the proposal, staring at the ring on her finger. The sapphire glistened under the lamp, but in her heart there was silence. She later admitted, "I felt like a lamb to the slaughter." July 29, 1981, the day of the wedding, London streets were flooded with cheering crowds. Flags waved, bells rang, cameras flashed. 750 million people across the globe watched her in her ivory silk gown, the long veil flowing like a river of light. To the world, she was radiant, glowing, the perfect bride in the perfect story. But inside the carriage, as she was taken to St. Paul's Cathedral, she felt her chest tighten. The fairy tale dress could not hide her trembling hands. As she walked down the aisle, the whispers in her mind grew louder. "This is not love. This is my duty. This is not freedom. This is prison." The cathedral echoed with vows and prayers, but in her heart, a silent storm raged. When she accidentally called her groom Philip Charles Arthur George instead of Charles Philip, the world laughed it off as nerves. But Diana knew it was more than that. It was the slip of a truth she couldn't voice. Her soul, did not belong here. Behind the palace gates, reality unfolded quickly. The fairy tale castle was colder than she had imagined. The walls carried centuries of tradition, but no warmth. Charles was distant, off and away, his heart entangled elsewhere. Diana felt herself disappearing in those golden halls. Her laughter replaced by silence, her joy swallowed by loneliness. She would cry at night, hidden away in her chambers, the sound of celebration outside mocking her emptiness within. She later confessed in her diary that she felt like the most miserable woman in the world. The crown that glittered on her head was heavier than chains. And yet, the cameras demanded a smile. Every balcony wave, every public appearance, every carefully orchestrated photo, all painted the image of a perfect marriage. Behind closed doors, Diana fought invisible battles. Her self-worth crumbled. Her body bore the scars of despair. She struggled with eating disorders, with depression, with the crushing pressure of being perfect in a world that wanted her broken. The marriage was no fairy tale. It was a performance, a dance of shadows. And Diana, trapped in a palace that was never truly hers, began to realize something. If she could not find love within these walls, she would seek it elsewhere, not in romance, but in humanity. For within her pain, a new fire was being born. The girl who had once comforted a lonely child in a schoolyard would now rise to comfort millions. The palace that sought to silence her would one day tremble at the power of her voice. The fairy tale had cracked. The shadows were spreading, and soon, the world would see the real Diana, not the princess the palace created, but the woman destiny demanded. Inside the grand walls of Buckingham Palace, silence was never empty. It was heavy, sharp, and filled with unspoken words. For Diana, silence became her enemy. The marriage that had once promised companionship turned into a battlefield without soldiers, a war without sound. She was surrounded by luxury, chandeliers dripping with crystals, corridors lined with velvet carpets, portraits of kings and queens staring down from centuries past. But for Diana, these walls became a gilded cage. Every smile was rehearsed, every step measured, every moment recorded by cameras eager to capture a fairy tale that did not exist. At night, when the palace lights dimmed and the corridors grew still, Diana wept into her pillow. The world saw a princess adored by millions, but in the quiet hours, she was just a woman suffocating under loneliness. Charles grew more distant. His eyes were elsewhere, his words colder. Diana felt the sting of betrayal without proof, but her heart knew. There was another woman in his shadow. Her body became the canvas of her despair. She confessed later that she would punish herself, struggling with eating disorders and self-doubt. She wanted to scream, to break free, but in the palace, emotions were forbidden. The royals did not cry. The royals did not break. The royals did not bleed. And so, Diana learned to fight in silence. But silence, for her, was not a weakness. It became her training ground. Each tear carved strength into her soul. Each lonely night hardened her resolve. While the palace tried to mold her into a quiet figurehead, Diana's spirit began to grow restless, rebellious. She found refuge in small acts of kindness. Visiting hospitals, holding the hands of strangers, comforting children who had never seen royalty up close. These became her weapons in the silent war. For every cold shoulder she received inside the palace, she gave warmth to a stranger outside its gates. The press, ruthless as wolves, stalked her every move. Flashes blinded her. Headlines tore her apart. Rumors poisoned her image. Yet even under attack, Diana discovered her greatest weapon, authenticity. She spoke with her eyes, with her touch, with her refusal to be a mask. The people saw it, and they loved her not because she was perfect, but because she was human. Within the palace, This love became another battlefield. The more Diana connected with the world, the more the monarchy felt threatened. Whispers floated through the corridors. She was becoming too popular, too independent, too dangerous. But Diana no longer feared the whispers. She had lived with silence long enough to understand its power. The wars were invisible, but they were real. Not fought with swords, but with cold glances, with press leaks, with loneliness and pain. And in those wars, Diana began to change. The shy girl who once feared abandonment was becoming a woman who refused to be silenced. She would not win every battle. She would not escape unscathed. But in every war she fought, against her marriage, against the press, against tradition itself, Diana carved a place in history. The palace had given her shadows. But in those shadows, she discovered her own light. And soon, that light would shine so bright, it would challenge the very crown above her. The palace was never truly quiet. There were always footsteps echoing in the halls, guards at their posts, the distant hum of tradition pressing against the air. But for Diana, the loudest sound was silence, the silence of being unseen, unheard, unloved. Her smile fooled millions. Every balcony wave, every gala entrance, every carefully posed photograph. It all told the world she was the perfect princess, living the perfect fairy tale. Yet when the doors closed and the lights went out, her smile dissolved into tears. Diana was drowning in loneliness. Her marriage was collapsing in whispers. Charles had his heart elsewhere, and though the palace pretended all was well, Diana knew the truth. Betrayal hung in the air like a shadow that would not leave. She tried to cope, but the pain found its way into her body. Food became her weapon and her prison. She would eat to numb the ache, then punish herself to feel some control. Her diary became her only friend, pages stained with ink and tears. One night, she wrote, "I am so tired of crying into the dark. Does anyone even see me? Does anyone even care?" But no one came. Her cries were muffled by royal walls, her sadness hidden under pearls and diamonds. Even when she sought help, her pain was dismissed. To the monarchy, emotions were weakness. And weakness had no place in the House of Windsor. So she carried her despair alone. There were nights. She stood by her window at Kensington Palace, looking out into the London streets below. Ordinary people walked freely, laughed freely, loved freely. Yet she, the Princess of Wales, felt like a prisoner. "They think I have everything," she whispered once, "but I have nothing that matters." And still, every morning, she put on her mask. She let the cameras see what they wanted. She let the palace play its game. But inside, the cry continued. A silent scream, echoing in the chambers of her soul. Yet even in this darkness, something extraordinary began to take shape. For in her despair, Diana started to recognize the pain of others. She saw her reflection in the sick, the forgotten, the unloved. She understood suffering because she lived it. And slowly, she began to turn her pain into purpose. The cry that no one heard was not wasted. It was transformed. Her loneliness became compassion. Her despair became strength. Her silence became a voice for millions who also cried unseen. And though no one in the palace heard her that night, the world would soon hear her louder than ever. In the coldness of royal life, Diana discovered a warmth that no crown, no palace, no throne could ever offer. The love of her children. When Prince William was born in 1982, the world saw an heir to the throne. But Diana, she saw her first true reason to live. The first time she held William in her arms, the loneliness that had been haunting her for years faded for a moment. His tiny fingers wrapped around hers, she whispered, "You will never feel the emptiness I have felt. I will love you beyond the crown, beyond tradition, beyond everything." Motherhood became her secret kingdom. She found joy in the smallest things. Sneaking William into amusement parks, reading him bedtime stories, holding him close even when the cameras demanded distance. Unlike the generations of royals before her, Diana refused to let her children be raised by nannies and protocol alone. She wanted them to know love, not just duty. In 1984, when Harry was born, Diana's heart doubled in strength. The palace saw another, spare heir. But for her, he was no spare. He was her joy, her light, her little fighter. With 2 sons in her arms, Diana finally felt she had a family of her own, one that no royal tradition could take away from her. But her love for William and Harry was more than just affection. It was a rebellion. The monarchy demanded distance, demanded formality. Diana broke those rules. She hugged them in public. She knelt down to look into their eyes. She let them be children, not symbols. Her boys became her shield against despair. On nights when she still cried in silence, their laughter gave her strength to rise again. When the press grew cruel and the palace grew colder, she poured all her energy into being the kind of mother she never had. The world began to notice. Diana wasn't just the people's princess anymore. She was a mother who redefined what it meant to be royal. She showed the world that even behind palace walls, humanity could survive. For Diana, the crown was never made of gold and jewels. Her true crown was William's smile, Harry's laughter, and the bond she built with them. It was a crown the monarchy could not control, a crown that made her stronger than the loneliness, stronger than the whispers, stronger than the walls of Buckingham Palace. And through her children, Diana discovered something extraordinary. She had the power not just to change her own story, but to change the very idea of what royalty could mean. Her sons gave her courage, and soon, that courage would lead her to take risks the monarchy never expected. Risks that would make her loved by millions, feared by those who ruled. The monarchy had rules, invisible chains meant to keep royals apart from the people. Distance was tradition. But Diana was different. Where others waved from gilded balconies, she stepped into the crowd. Where others wore gloves to shake hands, she touched with her bare skin. Where others carried titles, she carried compassion. Her journey into the heart of the people began quietly. A visit to a children's hospital, a moment by the bedside of a patient, a smile offered to someone who had forgotten how to hope. But each act was more than charity. It was rebellion. Royals were meant to observe, not to embrace. Yet Diana embraced everyone. One moment changed everything. In the late 1980s, during the height of the AIDS crisis, fear filled the world. Patients were shunned, abandoned, treated like outcasts. Doctors wore gloves, families kept their distance. But Diana, in front of flashing cameras, knelt down and held the hand of an AIDS patient with her bare hands. The world gasped. The stigma cracked. With a single touch, Diana told millions of people that compassion was stronger than fear. That act, simple yet revolutionary, turned her into something the palace never planned: the voice of the voiceless. She visited leprosy centers, homeless shelters, and landmine victims in war zones. She refused to let cameras see her as a queen in waiting. Instead, she wanted them to see her as a woman who cared. "Every person matters," she often said. She lived those words. The media, once her tormentors, could not ignore the power of her presence. Headlines called her the People's Princess. And for once, Diana wore the title proudly. It was not given by the crown, but by the hearts of millions. But this new crown made her dangerous. Within the palace walls, whispers grew louder. She was too popular, too independent, too uncontrollable. The monarchy preferred silence, but Diana had become a storm. Yet she did not care. The more they tried to silence her, the more she reached out to the world. She danced with AIDS patients, hugged sick children, laughed with strangers on the street. She was breaking barriers no royal had dared to touch. In the eyes of the people, she was no longer just Princess Diana. She was hopeful. She was kindness. She was proof that even in a world of rules and crowns, humanity could survive. But with love came danger. Every flash of the camera grew harsher. Every headline is sharper. The press followed her like shadows, desperate to capture every smile, every tear, every secret. While Diana became the most loved woman in the world, she also became the most hunted. The crown feared her. The press consumed her. And yet, the people adored her. Diana had changed the meaning of royalty forever. But with every step into the spotlight, she also walked closer to a fate she could not escape. The fairy tale had already begun to crack, but by the late 1980s, the fractures were impossible to hide. To the world, Diana and Charles were still the golden couple, photographed on balconies, cheered by crowds, immortalized in glossy magazines. But behind palace doors, the truth was poisonous. Charles's heart had never fully belonged to Diana. Even before their marriage, there had been whispers of another woman, Camilla. Diana had felt it from the start, an invisible presence in their marriage bed. Every time Charles grew cold, every time he turned away, she knew his warmth was kept for someone else. At first, Diana blamed herself. She was too young, too emotional, too different from the world Charles had grown in. But as time went on, she realized the truth. She was not the problem. She was simply the wrong fit for a man whose heart had already been claimed. The betrayal was not a sudden blow. It was a slow bleeding wound. Charles would disappear into hunts, into polo matches, into Camilla's shadow. Diana would be left alone in the palace, her cries echoing in empty halls. The press called it a troubled marriage, but for Diana, it was war. By 1989, the affair was no longer a secret. Whispers turned into headlines, headlines into scandals. Diana felt humiliated, trapped in a marriage that was watched by millions but loved by none. She confronted Charles, desperate for answers, desperate for honesty. His reply was cold, unforgettable. Do you seriously expect me to be the first Prince of Wales in history, not to have a mistress? The words pierced her like a knife. At that moment, Diana realized the truth. Her marriage was never meant to be about love. It was about duty, image, the crown. And she was the casualty. But Diana was not the kind to fade quietly. Betrayal, instead of breaking her, sparked a fire within her. She began to fight back in the only way she knew, through her humanity. While Charles clung to tradition and protocol, Diana clung to the people. The more he betrayed her, the more she gave herself to the world. Yet the palace could not ignore the scandal forever. Rumors became recordings. One infamous tape of Charles and Camilla revealed the depth of his betrayal. The monarchy's mask slipped, and for the first time, the royal family was not untouchable. Diana too had her own moments of rebellion. She sought comfort outside the marriage, searching for the love and validation the crown denied her. And while the tabloids feasted on every rumor, Diana's pain became public property. What had begun as a fairy tale was now a battlefield. The press turned their cameras into weapons. The palace turned cold. The marriage turned to ashes. Yet even as her heart bled from betrayal, Diana discovered something extraordinary. The people stood with her. They did not see a broken princess. They saw a woman surviving pain they understood. For every betrayal Charles gave, the world gave Diana love. But the storm was only beginning. Love and betrayal had torn her marriage apart. Soon, it would tear the monarchy itself into pieces. The British crown had survived centuries of wars, scandals, revolutions. Kings had fallen, queens had been betrayed, but the institution endured. Yet in the 1990s, it was not politics or enemies abroad that shook the monarchy, it was Diana. By now, the cracks in her marriage to Charles were no longer whispers. They were headlines broadcasted across televisions and splashed across newspapers worldwide. For centuries, royal marriages were kept private, their flaws hidden behind palace gates. But Diana and Charles's collapse was different. It was public, brutal, and unstoppable. The press loved the drama. Every leaked recording, every cold glance, every silent dinner was turned into front-page news. Diana became both the victim and the heroine of a modern tragedy. Charles became the villain, a future king tainted by betrayal. In 1992, Prime Minister John Major announced what the world already knew. Diana and Charles were officially separating. For the monarchy, it was humiliation. For Diana, it was bittersweet freedom. But separation did not end the war. It only exposed deeper wounds. Diana, now unbound from palace control, began to speak openly. Her most shocking moment came in 1995, during her BBC Panorama interview, watched by millions. With her calm voice and piercing honesty, she shattered the illusion of royal perfection. She confessed her battles with bulimia, her loneliness, and the betrayal of her marriage. Then came the line that shook the crown itself. "Well, there were 3 of us in this marriage, so it was a bit crowded." The words struck like thunder. The world gasped. The monarchy trembled. Never before had a royal spoken with such raw honesty, exposing centuries of silence with a single sentence. The interview didn't just break Charles's image. It cracked the crown. For the first time, people began to question the monarchy itself. Could an institution built on tradition survive when one woman's humanity outshone its grandeur? Inside Buckingham Palace, Diana was seen as a threat. She was too loved, too powerful, too uncontrollable. The Queen, usually silent, grew worried. To the palace, Diana was no longer just a princess. She was a force that could dismantle the monarchy's carefully built walls. Yet to the people, she was the crown they wanted. Not gold and jewels, but kindness and courage. While Charles was criticized, Diana's popularity soared. Crowds cheered her louder than ever. Children clung to her hands. The world didn't just admire her. They adored her. The monarchy had survived wars. But now it was fighting something far more dangerous, the heart of the people, captured by a woman they could not control. The crown was not falling, but it was broken. In that break, Diana found her true power. She was no longer just the Princess of Wales. She had become something far greater. A queen in the hearts of millions, but power came with a cost. The more she shone, the more dangerous her life became. The cameras grew hungrier. The press grew more ruthless. The monarchy grew more desperate. The broken crown was not just a symbol of change. It was a warning. Diana was walking a path no one had survived before. And ahead, in the shadows, destiny was waiting. When Diana finally stepped out of the shadow of her marriage, the world expected her to break. But instead, she rose higher than ever. No longer bound by palace rules, she became her own woman, free, radiant, unstoppable. The divorce in 1996 ended her royal duties. It did not end her power. In fact, it multiplied it. Without a crown, without a title beside her husband's name, Diana became more than a princess. She became a global icon. She poured herself into charity work like never before. She walked through minefields in Angola, fearless under the sun, proving to the world that compassion could change politics. She held children dying of illness, hugged mothers who had lost everything, reminded the forgotten that they still mattered. The world couldn't look away. Wherever she went, crowds gathered. Cameras flashed endlessly. For the people, Diana was not just a symbol of hope. She was hope itself. But freedom came with a cost. With no palace walls to protect her, Diana was more exposed than ever. The press, obsessed with her every move, hunted her like prey. Every smile, every step, every secret dinner became front-page news. She wanted to live, to love, to simply be a woman. But privacy became impossible. Her phone calls were tapped. Her vacations were invaded. Photographers chased her cars, climbed trees to capture her through windows, shouted her name until she flinched. Diana once said, "The biggest disease in the world today is the feeling of being unwanted." Ironically, she was the most wanted woman alive. Wanted by millions, wanted by the press, wanted by history itself, but not wanted for peace. Her freedom allowed her to chase happiness again. Rumors of romances filled the tabloids. Some true, some lies. The most public was with Dottie Fade, the son of a billionaire, whose companionship brought her rare moments of laughter and escape. For once, Diana seemed to breathe again. Yet even in love, she was never truly free. Every glance, every touch, every holiday on a yacht was devoured by lenses. The more she searched for life, the more the press suffocated her. The crown had bound her. Now freedom haunted her. It was a cruel twist of fate. The more she belonged to the people, the less she belonged to herself. And Diana, who had once fought to be heard, was now trapped in a world where her voice was drowned out by the endless clicking of cameras. The price of freedom was heavy, and soon, that price would demand everything. Everywhere she went, they followed. Their footsteps were invisible, but their presence was crushing. Paparazzi were no longer just photographers. They had become Diana's shadows, hunting her day and night. At first, she tried to ignore them. She would put on her sunglasses, smile politely, and walk quickly past the flashing lights. But the flashes were relentless. Even at night, the darkness was broken by the stinging glow of cameras. It was as if she could never escape, not even in her dreams. Vacations were invaded. Private dinners were ambushed. Even her quiet moments with William and Harry became spectacles. Once, while taking her boys to school, Diana saw photographers climbing walls, shouting her name, clicking furiously. Her sons looked frightened, and that broke her heart. She whispered to them, "Don't be scared. They want me, not you." But inside, she was terrified. Her phone was tapped, her letters stolen, her friends bribed. Every word she spoke risked becoming tomorrow's headline. There were days she felt like a prisoner again. Only this time, the cage had no walls. Her relationship with Dottie Fade became their newest obsession. They chased her cars through the streets of London, stalked her vacations in the Mediterranean, published grainy pictures of her on boats, beaches, balconies. To the press, her happiness was not hers to keep. It was theirs to sell. Diana once confided to a friend, "I feel like I'm being hunted, like a fox in a chase with the hounds behind me." It wasn't paranoia. It was the truth. Wherever she went, engines roared behind her, motorcycles swarmed her car, voices screamed her name. The shadows were closing in, and Diana, the most photographed woman in the world, was losing the simple right to exist unseen. Yet she still tried to live. She still smiled, still loved, still fought to carve moments of freedom. Each step into the light meant more danger. Each stolen breath of happiness came with a cost. The chase had become her life, and soon it would become her death. Paris, August 30th, 1997. The city of lights was alive, buzzing with music, laughter, and neon glow. For Diana, it was supposed to be just another evening. Dinner with Dottie Fade, quiet hours in a city, where she hoped to find a slice of peace. But peace was something Diana hadn't known in years. From the moment she stepped out that night, the shadows followed. Cameras clicked. Motorcycles revved, voices screamed her name. Even in the elegant Ritz Hotel, safety felt fragile. She tried to smile, but her eyes betrayed her wariness. She was tired of running, tired of being prey. Inside the restaurant, she and Dodi dined quietly, whispering to each other, laughing in rare moments of freedom. To the world, she was the people's princess. But here, she was just a woman, hoping for love, hoping for peace. As midnight drew closer, the plan was set. They would leave quietly, slip through the back, and escape to Dotty's Paris apartment. No crowds. No chaos. Just silence. But silence never came. As their black Mercedes pulled out of the Ritz, the roar began. Engines behind them, headlights blinding, cameras flashing even in the dead of night. The paparazzi were waiting, and the chase began. Inside the car, Diana sat low, her heart pounding. Henry Paul, the driver, pushed the car faster, trying to outpace the swarm of motorcycles closing in. Dottie sat beside her, protective, anxious. Their bodyguard tensed, bracing for the worst. The streets of Paris blurred into streaks of light. Tires screeched. Horns blared. The hunters grew closer, shouting, snapping pictures even as the car sped dangerously through the city. And then, the tunnel. Concrete walls swallowed the car as it raced into the Alma tunnel. Shadows of motorcycles followed. A flash, a swerve, a scream of metal against stone. In a single heartbeat, the world's brightest star was thrown into darkness. Above the tunnel, Paris continued to glitter. Couples laughed along the sign. Tourists marveled at the Eiffel Tower, unaware that history was being rewritten just beneath their feet. In those final moments, Diana was not a princess, not a public figure, not a headline. She was just a woman. Frightened, fragile, human. A woman who wanted to be loved. And as the world slept, the people's princess breathed her last. The chase was over. But the story was only beginning. The news broke like thunder. Princess Diana died in a Paris car crash. In the early hours of August 31, 1997, the words spread across television screens, radios, and newspapers. At first, people refused to believe it. Diana, the woman who had survived betrayal, who had walked through minefields, who had shone brighter than the crown itself, could not be gone. But she was. Within minutes, grief spilled into the streets. Outside Buckingham Palace, flowers began to pile up. At first, a few bouquets, then hundreds, then thousands. Soon, the gates were buried under seas of roses, lilies, handwritten notes. Candles burned through the night. Strangers held each other and wept as if they had lost a sister, a daughter, a friend. The world mourned not just a princess, but a piece of itself. In Africa, children remembered the woman who had knelt in the dust to hold their hands. In hospitals across Europe, AIDS patients wept for the only royal who had touched them without fear. In war zones, victims of landmines prayed for the soul of the woman who had walked beside them. Diana had belonged to Britain, but in death, she belonged to humanity. The royal family, however, was silent. Days passed, and there were no flags lowered, no public words from the Queen. The people grew angry. Crowds shouted outside the palace gates, "Where is our Queen? Where is our comfort?" The monarchy, already fragile, was being tested like never before. Meanwhile, Diana's body lay in London, surrounded by love and sorrow. William and Harry, just 15 and 12, walked behind their mother's coffin, their faces pale, their eyes hollow. Millions watched in silence as the two young boys carried the weight of the world's grief on their small shoulders. It was an image so powerful, so heartbreaking, that it burned itself into history. On the day of her funeral, more than 2.5 billion people watched across the globe. Streets were filled with mourners, churches overflowed with prayers, and the world seemed to stop. Sir Elton John sang, his voice trembling, "Goodbye." England's rose. Diana was gone, but she had left behind something no crown could replace: love. pure, unfiltered, human love. The world had lost a princess, but it had gained a legend. The people's princess was no longer bound by titles or walls. In death, she became eternal. And as her coffin was lowered into the earth, one truth echoed louder than the bells of Westminster. Diana may have died, but her light would never be extinguished. When Diana's coffin was lowered into the ground at Althorpe, many believed her story had ended. But in truth, her story was only beginning. Death had silenced her voice, but her light refused to fade. Almost overnight, Diana transformed from a princess into a legend. Her compassion, her courage, her humanity became a mirror the world could not stop gazing into. People began to ask themselves, what does it mean to truly live? To truly love? To truly care? Diana had shown them the answer, not through speeches, but through touch, through presence, through action. Her legacy was everywhere. In hospitals, nurses remembered how she had held AIDS, patients' hands without fear. In Angola, the world remembered her fearless walk through minefields, which pressured governments to sign treaties banning landmines. In orphanages, children remembered the warmth of her hugs, a warmth no camera could ever fake. But her greatest legacy lived in her two sons. William and Harry, they carried her lessons, her heart, her defiance against cold traditions. William grew determined to modernize the monarchy, to bring warmth where there had once been distance. Harry, fiery and restless, carried her rebellious spirit, often challenging the very institution that had failed his mother. The monarchy, shaken by the world's outrage at their silence after her death, was forced to change. For the first time in centuries, the crown bent to the will of the people. The Queen addressed the nation, admitting that Diana had been special, unique, irreplaceable. That moment was history. The monarchy, once untouchable, humbled by the legacy of a woman they could not control. Diana's memory became untouchable. Statues were raised in her honor. Documentaries told her truth. Books carried her pain and her triumph. Every time a mother hugged her child in public, every time a leader chose compassion over pride, Diana's spirit lived again. Even decades later, her light has not dimmed. She remains the people's princess, not because of a title, but because she chose humanity over hierarchy, love over duty, truth over silence. Her story is proof that even in a world built on power and crowns, it is kindness that lasts forever. Diana's life ended in a Paris tunnel, but her legacy walks on, in every act of compassion, in every voice that dares to speak against silence, in every heart that believes love is stronger than fear. The crown may have been broken, but through Diana, the world discovered something greater than any throne. A light that will never go out. The image of two young boys walking behind their mother's coffin became one of the most haunting moments of the 20th century. William, just 15, and Harry, only 12, had lost not just a mother, but the one person who shielded them from the cold walls of the palace. The world wept for them, but more than that, the world wondered, what would become of Diana's sons? For William, the loss carved a path of duty. He carried the weight of both his mother's love and his future crown. Diana had always whispered to him, "You must never forget you are not just a prince, but also a boy who belongs to the people." Those words became his compass. As he grew, William softened the monarchy's image, smiling openly, reaching out to ordinary citizens, choosing a partner in Kate Middleton, a woman outside the aristocracy. In his choices, the world saw Diana's influence, a monarchy more human, more real. Harry, however, walked a different road. He inherited his mother's fire, her refusal to bow completely to tradition. His grief turned into rebellion. Wild nights, bold headlines, scars that the press never stopped exploiting. Yet beneath the chaos, the world recognized Diana's son passionate, compassionate, unwilling to be silent. He too carried her voice, speaking openly about mental health, war veterans, and later, about the pain of being trapped inside an institution that had cost him his mother. Together, the brothers embodied two sides of Diana's spirit. William, the steady flame of duty, and Harry, the burning fire of freedom. Though their paths often clashed, both were undeniably hers. The world watched as they grew, waiting for signs of their mother in their laughter, their gestures, their choices. And time proved it true. Diana had not left them. She lived in their kindness, in their courage, in the way they embraced the public without fear. When William walked down the aisle with Kate, the world whispered Diana's name. When Harry married Meghan, the world saw her defiance of tradition echo through him. And when the brothers spoke of their mother, their voices cracked, not just with grief, but with pride. Diana's story had not ended in the Paris tunnel. It was alive in her sons, in the future king, who carried her compassion to the crown, and in the restless rebel, who carried her truth to the world. Her sons were proof that love never dies. It only transforms, moving from one heart to another, carrying light across generations. And so, in William and Harry, the people's princess walked on. Diana's life ended too soon, but her dreams did not die with her. They lingered, unfulfilled, scattered like pieces of light waiting to be gathered. She had envisioned a world where kindness could cut through the cruelty of power, where titles mattered less than touch, where humanity rose above tradition. In her final years, Diana often spoke of starting a global foundation. She wanted to dedicate her life fully to causes the monarchy had dismissed as unroyal. AIDS, homelessness, mental health, and landmines. She imagined creating safe homes for abandoned children, hospitals where no one felt ashamed of their illness, schools where compassion was as important as knowledge. These plans never saw the light of day, yet the whispers of her vision inspired countless organizations that carried her torch. Her unfinished story also lived in the fight she began. Before Diana, few dared to talk openly about AIDS patients, minefield victims, or mental health struggles. After her, silence was no longer an option. Activists picked up her voice. Leaders quoted her courage. Doctors remembered her visits, her hugs, her refusal to wear gloves when holding the hand of someone the world had rejected. Then there were her personal dreams. She wanted to give William and Harry the life she never had. A life filled with love and normalcy. She wanted them to grow as men of the people, not just men of the crown, though she could not stay to see it. Her lessons still guided them, shaping their choices, their marriages, their causes. Her story was unfinished, yes, but perhaps that was the point. Legends are not meant to be completed. They are meant to echo. Diana's light was too great to fit into one lifetime, too vast to be contained by palaces or crowns. Every time a young activist dares to speak for the voiceless, Diana's dream continues. Every time a mother shields her child from pain, Diana's legacy grows. Every time someone chooses love over duty, humanity over power, the unfinished pages of Diana's story write themselves. She had said once, quietly, "I'd like to be a queen in people's hearts. I don't see myself being queen of this country." In death, she became exactly that. Not the Queen of England, but the eternal Queen of Hearts. Diana's story may have ended in 1997, but her unfinished story belongs to the world. It lives on, not in books or statues alone, but in every soul she touched, in every dream she left behind. As years turned into decades, Diana's memory did not fade. Unlike most figures of history, who become distant with time, her presence only grew stronger. She was no longer just a woman, or a princess, or even a mother. She had become something larger. An eternal symbol. She symbolized compassion in a world that often celebrated power. She symbolized courage in a palace that had long silenced emotion. She symbolized freedom in an institution built on duty. To millions, she was proof that one voice, one smile, one act of kindness could break centuries of cold tradition. The press had once chased her like prey, but in time, they too reshaped her into an icon. Her image, head tilted slightly, eyes full of both mischief and melancholy, appeared on murals, stamps, and posters across the world. Cities far from London painted her face on walls, calling her the Queen of Hearts. In those painted eyes, people saw themselves, vulnerable, but unafraid to love. In universities, her life was studied as a lesson in humanity. In charities, her methods of connecting with the forgotten became a blueprint. In movements for social justice, her name was whispered as inspiration, the woman who stood unarmed against stigma and won. But her symbolism went deeper still. To women trapped in loveless marriages, she was a voice of defiance. To those who struggled in silence, she was proof that vulnerability could be strength. To children growing up without safety, she was a reminder that kindness could come, even from the unlikeliest places. Every generation found something of themselves in Diana. She was not perfect, and that was her power. She was flawed, human, sometimes broken. Yet in that brokenness, people saw beauty. They saw the possibility of survival. They saw light. In the grand halls of history, kings and queens are remembered for battles won, treaties signed, or crowns worn. But Diana was remembered for something far rarer: love. She made the world believe that love, given freely and fearlessly, could outlast stone palaces and golden crowns. That is why, decades later, flowers still appear on her grave, letters still arrive at memorials, and tears still fall when her name is spoken. Diana did not just live. She became eternal. She was not the queen of a nation. She was the eternal symbol of the human heart. Diana's death was announced as a tragic accident, but almost immediately, whispers began to spread. Whispers that grew louder, darker, more persistent. For many, it was simply impossible to believe that the most photographed woman in the world could vanish so suddenly. In a random Paris tunnel, on a random night, the shadows of conspiracy began to rise. Why was the driver, Henry Paul, speeding so recklessly? Why were the paparazzi so close, and yet none of them captured the crash itself? Why did it take so long for help to reach Diana, even in the heart of Paris? And why, above all, did it feel as if someone wanted her silenced? Some believed Diana had become too powerful, too independent. No longer the obedient wife of a future king, she was a global figure, capable of overshadowing the monarchy itself. She had influence, wealth, beauty, and a voice that reached far beyond Britain. Could that have threatened the crown? Others pointed to her relationship with Dodi Fayed. The son of a wealthy Egyptian businessman, Dodi was not part of the establishment. Rumors swirled that Diana and Dodi were planning marriage, even a child. To the conspiracy-minded, this possibility was explosive. The future King of England's stepfather could have been a Muslim outsider. To some, this was unthinkable. Then came Diana's own words. In letters she had written before her death, she hinted at danger. She feared she might be killed in a car accident, staged to look like a crash. There is a plot, she had confided. Those words became fuel for endless speculation. Investigations followed, French, British, private. Some declared it a tragic accident caused by a drunk driver and relentless paparazzi. But many remained unconvinced. Even today, questions linger like shadows across history. Was it fate? Was it negligence? Or was it something darker, hidden behind palace walls and government silence. The truth may never be fully known. What is certain is this: Diana's death created not just grief, but doubt. And doubt, once born, never truly dies. Her story had been one of love, compassion, rebellion, and tragedy. But in the shadows of conspiracy, it became something else too. A mystery. A mystery that keeps her alive in whispers, questions, and the haunting thought that perhaps, somewhere, somehow, the people's princess did not die by chance. Official inquiries came and went. Reports were published, interviews broadcast, experts debated on television screens. The French inquiry concluded that it was an accident. A drunk driver, high speed, flashing paparazzi. The British investigation echoed the same: no conspiracy, no murder, just tragedy. But the people were not satisfied. For millions, the facts did not add up. The delayed ambulance, the missing footage, the strange inconsistencies in testimonies. It all felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. And so, the world did what it often does when truth feels incomplete. It created its own. In pubs, in cafes, in living rooms across Britain and beyond, conversations turned to Diana. Ordinary citizens whispered theories the way one might whisper a prayer. To them, Diana was too loved, too luminous to have been taken by chance. If the official story was simple, the people's verdict was not. Some believed the establishment had silenced her because she threatened the monarchy. Others felt she was punished for daring to love outside the royal mold. For many, it wasn't about evidence or reports. It was about instinct, about the sense that something precious had been stolen. And yet, in these countless verdicts, one truth stood above all: Diana remained innocent. She was never blamed, never judged harshly. Instead, the world painted her as a victim of forces too powerful, too ruthless to be named. Her image shifted from princess to martyr, a symbol not just of love, but of resistance. Against tradition, against cruelty, against silence. Years later, when documentaries revisited her life and death, audiences still wept, still questioned, still raged. The official verdicts may have closed the case, but the people never closed their hearts. Perhaps that was the real verdict, that Diana belonged not to palaces, not to governments, not to reports. She belonged to the people. And in their eyes, she would forever be more than a princess who died. She would be a symbol of truth in a world full of secrets, a light no conspiracy could ever extinguish. It has been more than 2 decades since that night in Paris, but the question still lingers like an echo. What if Diana had lived? Imagine her in today's world. A woman no longer bound by palaces, no longer shadowed by crowns. A woman in her 60s, still radiant, still graceful, still unafraid to be human. She would have embraced the power of the digital age. Social media, which now connects billions, would have been her stage, not for glamour, but for causes. A single post, a single message from her, could have mobilized millions for charity, for justice, for change. Hashtags would have carried her compassion across borders in seconds. Where others posted for fame, she would have posted for hope. Her voice, once stifled by tradition, would today be amplified without limits. She could speak directly to the people, bypassing newspapers and paparazzi. The world would have seen not just Diana the icon, but Diana the activist, Diana the mother, Diana the survivor. Imagine the royal family with her still alive. William and Harry would not have walked behind her coffin. Instead, they would have walked beside her, guided by her laughter, shielded by her love. Perhaps Harry's battles with the institution would have been softer, his wounds less deep. Perhaps William's crown would already feel lighter, touched by his mother's warmth. Even global politics might have felt her influence. Diana had already spoken against landmines, against stigma, against silence. In today's conflicts, in wars, in refugee crises, in climate battles, standing on the front lines, daring to comfort the forgotten, leaders would have sought her counsel because she had what they lacked: trust. And yet, perhaps most of all, she would have continued to be what she always wanted to be: a mother. A grandmother now, holding the children of William and Harry, telling them bedtime stories not of crowns and kingdoms, but of kindness and courage. The world she left behind has often felt colder, lonelier without her. But in imagining her here, alive, we see not just what we lost. We see what she taught us to carry on. Because maybe Diana doesn't need to be alive in the modern world. In a way, she already is. Her spirit runs through the very things we now value: authenticity, compassion, humanity. She was ahead of her time, and the world is only just catching up. So when we ask, what if Diana had lived? The answer is simple. She does. In the way we speak, in the way we love, in the way we refuse to forget her. Her presence may have left Paris in 1997, but her light burns brighter than ever in 2025. Time has a way of erasing faces, softening memories, and silencing voices. But not Diana's. Nearly 3 decades after her death, she remains as vivid as ever, a woman whose heart still beats in the rhythm of the world. She was born into privilege, married into royalty, and yet she found her true crown not in jewels, but in humanity. Her power was never in her titles, but in her touch. She didn't need thrones to be remembered. She only needed love, and she gave it endlessly. Diana's story was filled with pain, betrayal, loneliness, and tragedy. Yet in that pain, she forged something indestructible. She showed the world that vulnerability is not weakness, that kindness can outshine power, that even a broken heart can heal millions. When the world speaks of her, it does not speak only of her beauty or her fashion. It speaks of the mother who knelt to tie her son's shoelaces, the woman who hugged the dying, the princess who chose to walk through minefields where others feared to step. She made the world believe in something greater than crowns, compassion. And so, her heart became immortal. Immortal in William's steady devotion to his people. Immortal in Harry's fiery defiance against silence. Immortal in the laughter of her grandchildren, who never met her, but live in the warmth of her legacy. Immortal in the millions who still whisper her name with tears and smiles. The Paris tunnel ended her journey, but it could not end her story. Because legends do not die. They transform, they live on in the quiet moments. In a child's smile, in an act of kindness, in a stranger's hand reaching for another. Diana may no longer walk among us, but her heart beats everywhere. In hospitals, in charities, in broken homes where hope still flickers. She remains the eternal reminder that humanity, not power, is what truly lasts. And so, the people's princess became something greater. She became the people's heart. A heart too pure to be buried, too powerful to be silenced, too luminous to fade. Yes, Diana's body rests in Althorpe, but her spirit, her immortal heart, lives forever. And as long as love exists in this world, the name Diana will never die.